In this video, let's look at RapidAPI Studio's API management features called Hub Listing to manage and monetize your APIs. So without any further ado, let's jump into that. Like I mentioned in my previous video, to get access to RapidAPI Studio, you need to log into your account. For that, I've already logged into my RapidAPI Studio account, as you can see, and I'll be directed to my RapidAPI Studio's dashboard. Here I have added a number of APIs, as you can see on your screens. To view the hub listing feature in RapidAPI Studio, I'm going to click one of the API projects that I've already added. I'm going to click this Movies API that I created from Visual Studio Code editor by using the extension RapidAPI Client. If you want to learn how I did that, I'll recommend watching the free course on RapidAPI Client, the VS Code extension that I created. I'll link it in the description box. So let's now click this API project. After clicking the API project, I'll be directed to this hub listing section of RapidAPI Studio. The hub listing inside RapidAPI Studio is not limited to publishing APIs in RapidAPI Hub. Instead, you can use it for other things like securing your API, validating query parameters, setting up a gateway, adding RapidAPI auth to your API, and so much more. Before we go any further, I'll briefly explain the General and the Endpoints tab in RapidAPI Hub Listing section. In the General tab, you can add the API, you can even add the base URL in right here, and even make the API project public. After adding the project in the General tab, the next step is to create API endpoints. For that, I'm clicking the Endpoints tab right here, and in this section, I'm going to add all the endpoints of the API project. I'll explain these two tabs in detail in my next video, where I'll be teaching you how you can create your own API on RapidAPI Studio. For now, let's move on to the third tab, that's the Gateway tab. The Gateway tab has the feature of API Authentication. Adding authentication to APIs help to track their usage and also secure them. To enable rapid API authentication, I'm scrolling down, and here in access control, I have a number of authorization methods. You can employ the gateway to authenticate API calls from outside, improving your API security. In addition to the default rapid API auth only, you can set up an extra layer of OAuth 2, header, query, or basic authentication, or even no auth. If you want to learn more in detail how RapidAPI helps developers authenticate APIs, I'll recommend reading this guide that's already present on RapidAPI Guides. I'll link it in the description box. In this guide, you will know about the different authentication methods that RapidAPI Studio supports, about the RapidAPI auth, the OAuth 2 authentication method, the header API authentication method, the query API, and so on, with relevant images, so that it's easier for you to understand how RapidAPI helps developers authenticate APIs. To view the next feature, let's go back to the hub listing section of RapidAPI Studio, and inside the same Gateway tab, we have the Request Schema Validation feature. The Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP, lists 10 API security vulnerabilities. One of them is the absence of request schema validation in APIs. As I said, that inside the hub listing feature of RapidAPI Studio, you can also set up request schema validation if you haven't implemented it in your API. The request schema validation provides 3 options. For that, I'm going to enable this. The first is the pass-through everything or default behavior, where if the request contains a header or query parameter not defined in the API specification, the request will not be blocked. The second is the strip and pass-through, that will pass the request but strip the headers or query parameters not defined in the API specification. The third and the last is the block, that will block the request if it contains anything not defined in the API specification. Let's now talk about the request configurations. If your API is public, anyone can send a huge payload when calling it. This can slow down the server. Inside the hub listing, you can limit the request size. You can also configure the timeout between proxy and target endpoints. API versioning is another feature of the hub listing section in RapidAPI Studio. For that, I'm going to click this version v1 drop down menu, and here the manage versions. You can create multiple versions of an API inside the hub listing of RapidAPI Studio. For every new version, you can also define a different base URL, endpoints, transformations, and more. You can also build on top of an existing version. If you want to learn more about this Gateway tab in Hub Listing section of RapidAPI Studio, I'll recommend reading this guide on what is an API Gateway and features of RapidAPI Gateway. It's present in RapidAPI Guides. I'll link it in the description box. It has all the details you need to know about RapidAPI Gateway, including the features of RapidAPI Gateway with all the relevant images and GIFs to help you understand better. Let's now talk about subscribed user list. For that, I'm going to click this community tab in the hub listing section, where you can find all the users who are subscribed to your API. There are two categories there. The first is the paid users, and the second is the free users. All your users are divided between these two categories. At the time, since this API is free that I've already added, so there are no paid users, I'm going to click this free users, and I'm getting the list of all the users and the request in the last 60 days and so on. You can send a private message to any of your API users from the community tab. If they need a private plan, you can create one for them. More on this later, and even invite them to it. Let's now talk about API monetization. You can monetize all your APIs you add in RapidAPI Hub from RapidAPI Studio by clicking this Monetize tab in the Hub Listing section. It provides you with two options, that is the public plans and the private plans. As you can see, the public plans further consist the basic, the pro, ultra, and mega plans. You can customize each of them according to your liking. You can set up rate limiting, limit access to an endpoint, and more. If the user does not find a plan according to their needs, you can create one of them using the private plans. Let's go back to the private plans right here. The only difference is you need to invite people to it. RapidAPI Studio also provides native rate limits for your APIs. Rate limiting is the process through which you limit the number of requests coming to your API in a certain amount of time. It allows API providers to keep their APIs running for all users by controlling the number of requests. All in all, rate limiting is a critical defensive measure for APIs. I'm going to click this basic plan and here edit, and I'm getting this rate limit option right here. You can set it to allow only 20 requests in 1 minute. Furthermore, many APIs offer multiple pricing plans to their users, and naturally the rate limits for expensive plans should be better. That's why you can set different rate limits for different plans in RapidAPI Studio API dashboard to provide a better developer experience. That's all, folks. In this video, I have majorly covered the three tabs in the hub listing section of RapidAPI Studio. That's the gateway, the community, and monetize. The first two, the general and endpoints, I'll discuss it in the next video while I'll explain you how to create your own API inside RapidAPI Studio. So stay tuned.